Alright, so look, his story is history. You know, my story is a mystery. So I want to make sure y'all know what my story is. So when they first came to America, you know, it wasn't just Indians or even just indigenous people. It was all pretty much mixed up at that time. You know, it already been people that was banished from the other side of the world because of Christianity and because of their belief system. You know, they had their belief system tied up into religion. And anything outside of how they was teaching it, you know, you was banished for that. Kind of like the Gnostics, kind of like how they crucified Jesus Christ. So basically, they banished a lot of people, you know. But then when the conquistadors or whatever they was called came over here, you know, I think it was France, it was Spain. They came over here and when they conquered, they went for the strongest male, you know, the chief. And they killed the chiefs, they kidnapped the women and the children, and they enslaved them. So this became a thing when it came to conquering lands, you know. And at the time, after they was doing that, that's when around the same time the transatlantic slave trade was started. So when the transatlantic slave trade was started, you know, that was based out of West Africa. That was the slave port. So the next slave port was the Carolinas, and then they had one down in Georgia. So because most of these people just so happen to be black people, you know, and Spain and France, they spoke Spanish, so they called us Negroes. You know, that's a Spanish word for black. So over time, see, in the beginning it wasn't just slaves, it was indentured servants. So over time, because I guess I don't want to say it was because of slaves getting away and things of that nature, but we had indigenous people already who were black. And then we had indentured servants who were black, white, Indians, all of that. So they just decided to make sure that all of the black people who were indigenous and all of the black people who were from West Africa on the transatlantic slave trade were all enslaved. So they just started enslaving everybody since they were already enslaving indigenous people, and they had the transatlantic slave trade. So that's basically how it wound up going down, to the point where all people who were black, dark skin complexion people wound up being enslaved. So if you was of the lighter complexion, they labeled you as mulatto. You know what I'm saying? So mulatto and anything lighter than that wound up not having to be enslaved. So a lot of black people at the time who were mulatto, mixed, or whatever, you know, they wound up joining these other families, and then that's why you will see it's a lot of people from other races who have ancestry that's indigenous, Native American, black. They probably don't know, or some do know. Even Hispanic people, Mexican people have ancestry of slaves, you know, because a lot of slaves wound up running to Mexico, you know, because slavery was based out of the South. So a lot of slaves ran to Mexico at the time too. That was a little later on. That was a little later in history. So what wound up happening was, this is how slavery wound up being just black people over time. So when the transatlantic slave trade came, it was only 388,000. So the rest of us was indigenous or from the Caribbeans.